Hello, my name is Dario Clay, and this presentation will be my Homeland Security Policy Critique, and it will discuss implementing better collaborative police efforts and preventative planning for counterterrorism. Slide number 2, research topic and thesis. Ask yourself this question. Has international terrorism changed the way the U.S. identifies terrorist threats on American soil? Through collecting data on the effect of terrorism happening all over the world, you can evaluate how the U.S. uses this data to protect itself. Why did I select this topic? I selected this topic because the effects that terrorism has had on communities and families, including mine. This is one of the reasons I pursued a military/civilian career involving emergency management. Being able to help implement preventative plans at the local, state, and federal level have given me a great sense of purpose. The role of counterterrorism is very important towards protecting and deterring acts of terrorism. I also have hands-on experience with counterterrorism, as well as collaborating with military and civilian units to identify potential terrorist threats. This has led me to the path of creating and implementing safety procedures and protocols for government agencies. Slide number 3, key findings. On this slide, I'm going to discuss 3 key findings that better help us to identify and understand what terrorism is. Number 1, what is terrorism? Terrorism is commonly understood to refer to as acts of violence that target civilians in the pursuit of political and ideological aims. Key finding number 2, what are human rights? Human rights are universal values and legal guarantees that protect individuals and groups against actions and omissions primarily by state agents that interfere with fundamental freedoms, entitlements, and human dignity. Key finding number 3, what is international human rights? International human rights are laws that reflect in the number of core international human treaties and the customary international law. The local, state, and federal government have made efforts to prevent and deter terrorism through collaborative efforts, as well as communication. According to the Integrated United States Security Database, the IUSSD, data collected from the Global Terrorism Database, the GTD, collected from the 1970 to the 2000 timeframe, can accurately show the amount of terrorist acts that have occurred in the United States. Slide number 4, key findings continue. On this slide, I'm going to discuss 3 more key findings that are important to governments and agencies in understanding what terrorism is. Number 4, the issue with counterterrorism is defining what is considered terrorism. There is no universal definition of terrorism, which leaves room for interpretation in many cases. Many governments have identified what they consider a terrorist act might be, but this does not apply across the board for every government or agency. Number 5, another issue with counterterrorism is the extent that counterterrorism activities should be detained in the criminal justice process. The principle of rule of law and human rights imply that they can offer a peaceful, accountable, and legitimate response to terrorism without violation of human rights. The last issue with counterterrorism is, how do you address racially and ethnically motivated extremist networks with racial, ethnic, or religious hatred motivating them towards violence to perform violent actions? These factors are concerning, especially if you do not have a long-term government body to oversee counterterrorism objectives domestically. Slide number 5. On this slide, you'll see a visual representation of counterterrorism agencies and how they spread their roles and responsibilities across the United States. This is the result of interagency collaboration efforts. To the left, you'll first see Counterterrorism Mission Center, which is considered the private sector. Next, you'll see Transnational Organized Crime Mission Center, which is considered international partners or the Department of Intelligence. Next, you'll see Cyber Mission Center, which is a non-Title 50. Fourth is Counterintelligence Mission Center, which is the intelligence community, state, local, and tribal. And lastly is Economic Mission Center, which is considered the territorial partners. Slide number 6, international terrorism. On this slide, I will be discussing the deaths of terrorism since 2001. As shown on the chart, terrorism peaked in 2001 with the attack of September 11th. The surge in terrorism has continued to increase worldwide, reaching almost 35,000 deaths. The countries that have shown the highest number of deaths has been Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, Nigeria, and Iraq. Since 2001, terrorism deaths have been on the rise and continue to rise due to the shifting targets and tactics, the state sponsorship in terrorism, ad hoc organization, increasingly sophisticated weapons, and new motives. Slide number 7, strategic goals. Strategic goal number 1 should be enhance domestic terrorism related research and analysis. The importance of understanding domestic terrorism has been the mission of the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. And I quote, "This means that analysis of key trends and trajectories are now regularly generated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Department of Homeland Security, with support from the National Counterterrorism Center and others that are appropriate. This strategy needs to continue to develop how terrorism is analyzed and shared among the necessary agencies." Strategic goal number 2 should be improve information sharing across all levels within and well as outside the federal government. The implementation of government agencies and federal governments must continue to improve through information sharing on domestic terrorism threats across the government. This is to ensure that all relevant federal partners are equipped to take appropriate measures with the knowledge collected. Strategic goal number 3 should be illuminate transnational aspects of domestic terrorism. The access of internet has allowed terrorists to stay connected to supporters. The ability to communicate through the various internet communication platforms has aided with the recruitment and funding of terrorism. Taking action against this form of communication is imperative to reducing and deterring terrorist acts. The monitoring of internet communication in terrorist regions should be implemented. This can deter the use of internet platforms and apps assisting terrorists in communication objectives as well as recruiting. Slide number 8, strategic goals continued. In this slide, I'll be showing the importance of combating terrorist financing and what that looks like through a flow chart. First, starting with funding the flow to its point of origin source of funds to the organization. Second would be funding the flow to the organization to support an operation. Third would be funding the flow to funding from the operation to the operatives. These flow break down how terrorism funding flows through its system. Combating terrorist financing, CFT, is considered a highly complex process that involves a multitude of personnel. This process is responsible for helping the state with a wide variety of responses, ranging from legislation, international policy, to operational level response. The act of preventing terrorism organizations from gaining support through funding is vital to the deterrence and prevention of terrorism. Cutting off terrorist funding reduces its sustainability opportunity. Final slide, strategic goals and takeaways. In this slide, I'll be showing a visual representation of what domestic terrorism looks like on American soil using a pie chart and percentage. The importance of counterterrorism is vital to preventing and deterring terrorism in America. The impact of terrorism has not lessened, but it has shifted its tactics and are supported in this chart. The types of terrorism domestically have become less one-dimensional than the bomb attacks we were originally used to identifying terrorism, which has dropped to 25%. The use of transportation and explosives has risen to 27%. The use of firearms have become more commonly used in terrorist attacks, rising to 24%, while melee and other terrorist attacks are at 12% each.